1 year after Hurricane Helene devastated western North Carolina
You don't know what it's like until you lose everything.
and left communities in ruins,
When I saw this, I broke out in tears, man.
we face unanswered questions about this year.
All it takes is one.
Our team of meteorologists gets you ready for hurricane season.
We don't think we're going to have El Nino this summer and fall.
We'll look back at the Katrina catastrophe and explore why hurricane forecasting is better today.
Us old timers are like, wow.
Hear the emotional story of a New Orleans meteorologist whose wife went into labor hours before Katrina's arrival.
Just 16 hours later, we made that call to evacuate.
And get a high-tech look at what storm surge could do to America's favorite landmarks. The National Weather Desk presents Superstorms, the 2025 hurricane season.
Hello, I'm Chief Meteorologist Veronica Johnson at WJLA-TV in Washington, D.C. Trying to predict what the 2025 hurricane season will be like is more challenging than in recent years. While last year was more active than average, it fell a little short of forecasts. This year, with La Nina ending and El Nino still not in control, meteorologists look for other clues. Colorado State University's annual forecast calls for 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 of which are major. That's slightly above the 30-year average. We asked the experts at Colorado State to explain the factors that went into their forecast.
We don't anticipate El Nino this summer and fall. El Nino is warmer than normal water in the central and eastern tropical Pacific. Why that matters in the Atlantic is because of how it changes basically the atmospheric circulation. You tend to get stronger winds that blow out of the west, high up in the atmosphere, that tear apart hurricanes as they're trying to develop and intensify in El Nino. Unfortunately, we don't think we're going to have El Nino this summer and fall from a hurricane perspective. The Atlantic also, thankfully, not as warm as it was last year at this time, but it's still running somewhat warmer than normal. Warmer Atlantic basically provides more fuel for storms and just makes the environment more conducive for their formation. We also will look at various wind patterns, pressure patterns. Right now we have very weak La Nina that's likely transitioning over to neutral conditions, which means neither El Nino nor La Nina, but it's still pretty uncertain. There is still a chance we could go to El Nino this summer and fall, although we think it's fairly low. It's an informational tool. We stress it's not a preparedness tool. You need to be prepared the same for every hurricane season. But in a way, it's pretty amazing to think about that we have any skill at being able to forecast effectively weather events several months in advance. So, typically, for example, last year in early April, we said we're very confident it's going to be a very busy season. It was a very kind of unusual season in how it played out, but it was very busy. And to be able to have that information a few months out, I think is pretty impressive.
Of course, the biggest story of the last hurricane season was, and still is, Helene. The storm was responsible for at least 250 fatalities, making it the deadliest hurricane in the United States since Katrina in 2005. Helene made landfall along Florida's Big Bend as a Category 4 hurricane, but its biggest impact was 400 miles away in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. Up to 30 inches of rainfall fell in some places, triggering historic and devastating floods. Asheville, North Carolina was among the hardest hit regions as the water washed away homes, roads, and lives. Meteorologist Megan Danahay explains why the situation got so bad so quickly.
First, we had an area of low pressure develop to the northwest of us, and we had a stalled frontal boundary develop as well. Now, this front became very active. We saw record rainfall along that front, which helped to loosen the soil and saturate the soil. It made us very vulnerable ahead of Helene to landslides and infrastructure damage. Then Helene comes. We're getting rain rates at 3 to 4 inches an hour on top of that record rain in the precursor event. Not to mention we were on the dirty side of the storm, seeing the highest winds, and we saw incredible tree damage as well. One more thing to make this a disastrous setup is our mountains. We're unique here in western North Carolina, where we do get that upslope flow, where the air cools as it rises, it condenses, we get rain, and the rain really falls. In a situation like this, the stalled front and the hurricane, we had a southeasterly flow into the mountains. So not only was it the worst setup for record rain just by those two features, but orographic lift gave us even more rain, wringing out all the available moisture. And of course, the water had nowhere else to go but down into the valleys and rivers.
Survivors are still deeply impacted by Helene. Meteorologist Jason Boyer has been chief meteorologist in Asheville for the past 16 years. He said the storm and its aftermath will be with him and the community for a very long time.
I couldn't sleep very well that night.
The remnants of Hurricane Helene are here in full force right now.
I heard the wind, and it sounded like a hurricane had come to town. It was just the roar of the wind, the sheets of rain, and then literally pop, pop. I could see power flashes going. We started losing communication when trees started coming down in dozens and then eventually in hundreds.
We're talking gusts to 65 miles per hour below 3,500 feet.
Yeah, it does take a toll on you. I mean, mentally, you're seeing the damage and the destruction, unfortunately, the life lost. It does wear on you, and you start going back and replaying everything you said. And, you know, what did you say? What could you have said differently? Would it have made a difference? You know, things like that. You question it. It's just human nature. Those that live here do know that it's forever changed in a way that it's like a scar, you know, and you're going to be reminded of that scar. And we will build back. We were complacent in a way. We hadn't been hit by a major natural disaster in a very long time. We got to go back to 1916, the last time we had widespread, devastating flooding.
When I saw this, I broke out in tears, man.
But there's not much more you can do to stop trillions of gallons of water from rolling downhill. Gravity is always going to win. And there isn't a man-made object or sequence of events you can do to stop that water. It's going to happen. Flooding will happen. We can't build levees here. Dams do exist in some spots, but they can only do so much. You have to release that water at some point if it gets too high, and you risk the dam being compromised. So a lot of planning has to go into this, and I sure hope that we do learn a lesson and build further away from the rivers and prevent the loss that we saw with this system.
While Helene ravaged the southeast, Hurricane Milton was taking shape. It would soon become a Category 5 storm and one of the strongest hurricanes of record in the Atlantic. Milton also made landfall along Florida's Big Bend, causing major damage in Sarasota and Tampa Bay areas. The storm will long be remembered for all the tornadoes it spawned across Florida. West Palm Beach meteorologist Vitas Reed explains why there were so many twisters.
It looks like this storm had very strong vorticity and lift in the atmosphere, which was unprecedented for South Florida, and the strength of tornadoes that came from this storm. Look at all the warning boxes across South Florida and across the Treasure Coast over towards West Palm and Boca Raton. 126 tornado warnings, over 45 confirmed tornadoes as this storm pushed through. In fact, taking a look at this video of one of the confirmed EF3 tornadoes, you see a very strong wedge tornado, which is unprecedented down in South Florida. Usually you get weaker tornadoes from hurricanes at EF0 or EF1, but EF3 is very rare for this area to occur, and you see the damage that caused all across our area. In fact, taking a look at what caused that. For this storm, we had a strong upper level jet stream, a Category 4 Hurricane Milton, and then we have the right jet entrance over the central southern portion of the state. This storm was on a path to move through the central portion of the state. The northeast quadrant is where you get the strongest winds and the strongest vorticity. Plus, we had a very strong southerly component to help assist creating EF3 tornadoes. So we had 3 of them. EF2s, we had 2, EF1s, 25, and then EF07. So first storm on record to produce more than 1 EF3 tornado in history. So this is a very record-breaking storm, Hurricane Milton.
August marks 20 years since Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast. We'll look at how hurricane forecasting has changed since then and hear from a meteorologist who was on the air as Katrina approached when his wife went into labor. When Superstorms 2025 continues.
It was scary because our warm Gulf waters helped with rapid intensification. It grew big and bad and was barreling right toward us.
And you've got to be that lifeline that people can hear, whether it's on television or through radio, to get that valuable information to them. And that's the one thing that I do remember. We had to continue getting that information to people.
Meteorologist David Glenn and Kelly Foster were a weather team in Mobile, Alabama, when Hurricane Katrina upended countless lives. This August marks 2 decades since that storm changed that region forever. The numbers are truly staggering, but they don't really tell the whole story. More than 1,800 lives lost and approximately $202 billion in damage when adjusted for inflation. It's still the costliest storm on record. And all these years later, Birmingham meteorologist James Spann still remembers an ominous statement from the National Weather Service.
And this statement was coming out about how many communities would be uninhabitable for weeks, if not months, about the failure of well-built structures. It was almost terrifying to read, but by golly, it was a pretty accurate statement. And that got everybody's attention.
Meteorologist John Gumm's Katrina story is truly unique. Now, chief in Cincinnati, John was working mornings at a New Orleans television station. He opens up about how his memories of those days are so vivid and why he's still thankful even now.
Hurricane Katrina was a life-changing storm for me and my family. As Katrina came off the Florida coast, the model data had shifted dramatically. And every single piece of data that I looked at that morning and into the afternoon continued to paint a worst-case scenario for the city of New Orleans.
I mean, we have a lot of concerns with this storm, Eric, and
I was sad. I was extremely upset myself, but I had a job to do, and I did that job. But at the same time, I was transparent with my feelings. I was transparent about the feeling of dread, the feeling of doom that I had.
It's a big storm, Eric. It's getting bigger.
And I tried to put myself in the viewer's shoes. You know, what would they be feeling? What would they be thinking? The other part of that horrible feeling I had was because my wife was 9 months pregnant with our first child. I broadcast that day for over 12 hours straight, giving the worst case scenario for the city. This message that I received from my wife would change everything. She told me that she was in labor and she was having a friend take her to the hospital. My son was born. Connor Jacob Gumm came into the world just over 24 hours before Hurricane Katrina would make landfall. It wasn't long after that, though, that reality would set in. My wife, my newborn son, had to be evacuated. And just 16 hours later, we made that call to evacuate. I changed my first diaper in the back of an SUV. The next morning, we made it to my sister-in-law's home in Nashville, Tennessee, and it really didn't hit me until I saw the pictures of the flooding. Places that I drove by every day, going to and from work, were under 15 feet of water.
Here's the front view of the house.
A couple of weeks later, we were able to go back down and examine the damage at our home. And we were lucky. The storm surge had stopped a few blocks south of our house, but I'll never forget that smell. I'll never forget the damage that I saw driving back to our home. The place was unrecognizable, especially where the storm surge had flattened buildings. I think as a meteorologist, you often think about situations like this. You ask yourself what you would do, how you would handle it. But in the situation, when you get there, you just don't know until you're there. And I think that was the case with me.
In the 2 decades since Katrina, the tools and technology we use to forecast hurricanes have improved dramatically. Meteorologist Emily Gracie asked the deputy director of the National Hurricane Center about what's changed and where they are focusing attention this year.
We used to do a lot of things by hand, like old maps.
It's been nearly 20 years since Hurricane Katrina was being tracked and forecasted.
The best track, you would draw that. That was all paper and pencil. And then we used a lot of rule of thumbs back then.
Today, scientists at the National Hurricane Center in Miami have steadily improved their ability to predict where a storm will go.
While track has had this really steady improvement, and I would say the intensification part, feels the most dramatic.
Deputy Director Jamie Rome has witnessed the progress firsthand.
The forecasters now are making forecasts that, us old timers are like, wow, that's impressive that not only you can do it and get it right, but you have the confidence.
The technology revolution behind these improvements includes better observations, more powerful computers, and high-resolution models. But despite these advances, hurricanes still claim lives.
Even if the science and technology is improving at a breakneck pace, if we are unable to communicate or communicate it clearly, that investment never manifests itself into a societal improvement, meaning people never see it.
So how do scientists measure the success of their work? Increasingly through a stark but critical metric, mortality, which is why the agency is closely monitoring how and when people die from a tropical cyclone.
We track two forms of mortality, direct and indirect. So direct is what happens when the storm comes ashore, wind, storm surge, rain, flooding. Indirect is what's happening after the storm has passed. Things like heat exhaustion, carbon monoxide poisoning, lack of access to healthcare, stress and strain on the body. Direct fatalities, thankfully, are generally going down. Indirect mortality is going up.
So while precise forecasts will continue to improve in future years, the Hurricane Center is focusing their efforts on effective communication and preparation.
The Europeans over here, the GFS is over there, that's not saving anybody. Teaching them how to deal with power loss is saving them. Teaching them how to deal with the oppressive heat that comes after a storm is saving them.
For the National Weather Desk, I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie.
Water, not wind, is the biggest threat from a hurricane. When Superstorms 2025 returns, the new technology that allows us to see what coastal flooding could look like in major U.S. cities. When hurricanes threaten our coastlines, understanding the true power of storm surge can mean the difference between life and death. Now, a groundbreaking technology is changing how we visualize the devastating potential floods. Here's meteorologist Emily Gracie.
If you can see the future, you can shape the future. And that's sort of what we're trying to do with the information that we're collecting.
The Edge of America tour started last June in Maine. The team from Climate Central spent 6 months collecting data along the East and Gulf coasts.
And I finished Texas this past January, all the way down to South Padre Island.
The route included stops in recognizable locations.
We reached out to lots of folks before we started the tour. We wanted to find the places that were meaningful to them.
Flood vision is revolutionizing how we see storm surge risks. Using cutting-edge technology, Dan Kruger and his team are creating hyper-realistic visualizations that bring the threat of rising waters to life.
The way that flood vision works is we have 2 sets of cameras. Each set of cameras is shooting stereoscopically.
It's also outfitted with LiDAR and GPS. Using this data, they're able to add in the water to show the impact for a given location. For instance, here's a look at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Let's say there's a flood event on the way, and forecasters are predicting a 3-foot storm surge. This image of water inundation at a recognizable landmark packs a bigger punch than numbers on a map. Charleston sits in the low country of South Carolina. In 1989, Hugo landed just north of the city, and the water rose to nearly 7 feet above mean high tide line. Here's how that would look today. Over the decades, the city of Charleston has made structural changes to protect the city from water. It's worth noting that this model does not take those defenses into account. When Hurricane Helene made landfall last year, the water level in Clearwater rose to 6.67 feet. If a forecaster had shown this image, would residents have been more likely to evacuate? Can the public's perception change if they can imagine the places they live and love underwater? Climate Central is hoping the impact is life-saving without causing panic.
Now, we don't want to scare people. We just want to inform. It's happening every year, and we just want to inform and give them the information that can help save lives.
Before we go, some words of wisdom from Birmingham meteorologist James Spann.
We figure the season will be close to average, maybe a little above average. But remember, all it takes is one. So no matter what the seasonal outlook says, we all have to be ready.
Certainly words to live by. It's impossible to know exactly when and where hurricanes will form this early in the season. So if you live anywhere that a hurricane could strike, be prepared for the worst so that you can keep you and your family safe. I'm meteorologist Veronica Johnson, and thanks for watching.